Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support and the recent content. We do have a comment to read from Paula New 5228. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. And it was about the Pelicans and Brandon Ingram and the whole situation with him not really being able to be traded anywhere. And he said the Pelicans wouldn't give him a max contract, but the rest of the league wouldn't give him a max deal either. That's why the Pels couldn't trade him. You get what the market will pay. Yeah, at this point he's become pretty much an undesirable, even though he's a very skilled offensive player. There are holes in his game that kind of make him unworthy of that max contract deal, especially given this CBA, because I think previously, those were getting handed out left and right.
I mean, it's kind of like what we talked about when we were talking about the New Orleans Pelicans, where very good player, but ultimately in this new environment with the new CBA, do you want him basically as probably your second highest paid player? Probably not, because that's going to make it tougher to kind of fill out the rest of the roster. And we're going to see a lot of these teams have to make some tough decisions, right? Minnesota's already done that because they moved on from Karl Anthony Towns. And there's probably going to be some other teams, even the Boston Celtics, right, that will eventually have to make some decisions about who they're willing to pay, top dollar for.
Yeah. So, when we do these intros and stuff, please comment because we will read your comment at the beginning of an episode and we'll choose one. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so we are moving on through the Northwest Division to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And, this team has kind of taken the NBA by storm, obviously, right? Last year, they were the 1 seed in the Western Conference, and they basically won 57 games, 57-25, third on offense, fourth in defense, second in net rating. That team was really good, obviously, led by a ton of players, including Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, right? Gave you basically 30 a game, 5.5 assists, 5.5 rebounds, 6 assists, led the league in steals at 2 a game, just under a block, 54 from the field. So this guy was basically a one-man offensive wrecking crew. But obviously, to be fair, Oklahoma City has a lot of other talent as well. You had Chet Holmgren, who was coming off a fantastic rookie season. It wasn't his first season in terms of when he was drafted, but of course, as everybody knows, he missed the first season due to that foot injury he suffered in the Pro-Am Summer League games. And then he came back last season and averaged 16.5 points, 8 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 53 from the field and 37 from 3. And then you have the third member of their core, really, I guess, kind of the number 2, honestly, for the team is Jalen Williams, right? And that was their pick that they got from the Clippers in the Paul George deal that's starting to look worse and worse for the Clippers by the minute. And last year, right, he gave you 19 a game, 4.5 assists, 4 rebounds, just over a steal, 54 from the field, and 43% from 3 on 3.5 3-point attempts a game. So if you look at Oklahoma City right last year, they were the number 1 team in 3-point percentage. I mean, so obviously, offensively, they were able to kind of spread the floor, play 5 out, and have a ton of shooters. I mean, you had guys like Isaiah Joe, as I already mentioned, Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams. Even SGA is a capable 3-point shooter as well. Lou Dort shot a terrific percentage from 3. So when you look at this Oklahoma City team, right, their progression has been kind of something to really be impressed by, because you look at the fact that way back when in that 2019-2020 season, that was kind of the first year of the quote-unquote rebuild, but it was also a transitional year because they had just moved on from Russell Westbrook. They had just moved on from Paul George, and they brought in Chris Paul, and they had a bevy of other guys, including SGA, and they were able to make the playoffs, and, they took the Rockets to 7 games. Then they traded Chris Paul to the Suns, and then they were kind of able to accelerate the rebuild, and then they were able to get some of these guys in the draft, as I already mentioned, like Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams, although that was a Clippers pick. And then 2 seasons ago, right, they were a play-in team when a lot of people thought that they would be one of the worst teams in the NBA, because that was obviously the year that Chet Holmgren got hurt, and then everybody kind of just assumed they were going to tank, but they competed and they were right there. Obviously there were some people that kind of thought that they could get into the playoffs, and they gave it their best. They took out the New Orleans Pelicans, which we had just talked about, the team that we just kind of referred to with that comment. And then they did lose to the Minnesota Timberwolves, if I'm not mistaken. So that didn't necessarily go amazing. But either way, it was fine. So ultimately, last season, then you had the emergence of Holmgren and Williams and SGA as well as others. And they, like I said, they were awesome. They lost in the second round to the Dallas Mavericks, right? The team that would represent the Western Conference. But, even though it was a disappointing postseason loss, at the same time, they still, I think, overperformed relative to what we all thought we were going to see from them. You wouldn't have expected them, I think, usually on average, to go from basically a 9-10 seed to the number one seed in the Western Conference. Although, to be fair, that kind of happened with the previous iteration of the Thunder, where you had Durant, Westbrook, and Harden, and they went from, basically a bad team to, a low playoff team and then a 50 whatever win team. So you kind of saw like a foundation, right, for, a really, really good team. But when you look at Oklahoma City, you could kind of tell what their weaknesses were last season, right? They didn't have a ton of size outside of Chet, but even him, he's kind of a skinny guy, obviously. So he didn't have a lot of physicality. And that's why some people were wondering, well, if they're the one seed, who's their 8th seed matchup, right? Was it going to be a team like the Lakers? Was it going to be a team like Sacramento? Was it going to be a team like the Pelicans or the Warriors? And it ended up being the Pelicans, albeit without Zion, and they swept them, right? Not really much of a challenge or a contest. The first game was actually pretty close, but that kind of set the stage for that was their first real taste of the postseason, and they got a lot of experience out of that. And that's where you also give credit to them for continuing to fight it out when they were trying to make the play in a couple seasons ago, because it kind of gave them a lot of the experience in terms of trying to have winning habits and preparing for these type of seasons now. So when we look at this team and we look at what they did in the offseason, they made some pretty significant moves. First off, they ended up trading Josh Giddey, who we had actually talked about, where we kind of said at a certain point not all those young guys would stay. Somebody would have to be moved. And we kind of assumed that Giddey was going to be the odd man out just because his skill set didn't necessarily fit or mesh with some of the other guys, even though he's got some positive, skills to work with, right? He's a really good passer, ball handler, good rebounder for a guard. He's got great size. He just wasn't a good outside shooter, and it really became a problem in the playoffs when teams were just leaving him open and daring him to shoot, and he couldn't do anything. So they dealt him for Alex Caruso, right, who is a very different player, but honestly a much better fit. Obviously, some people can kind of debate whether or not you prefer having Caruso or Josh Giddey, but I think given where both teams kind of are, you're probably, if you're Oklahoma City, going to take a W on this one because of the fact that you got a guy who is a veteran, who's been in some playoff games, was on a championship team, and is an even better player now than he was in LA, because now he's actually a much better three-point shooter, right? The last couple of seasons, he's been somewhere around, 40% from three. He was 36 2 seasons ago, and this past season he was 41% from three. And he's an even better defender because he was an all-NBA defender the last couple of seasons. So you got a guy like that for, obviously it sucks to lose a guy that you just drafted, but either way, it is, I think, probably for this type of team an upgrade because you get a guy that just stylistically fits a lot better on both ends of the floor, doesn't really need the ball. He can spot up and shoot, and he'll take on the other team's toughest perimeter assignment. He can even switch on to some bigger players as well because honestly, for Chicago, since they've had so many injuries, he's played a lot at the forward spot as well for them. At certain times, he was kind of their starting power forward alongside DeRozan, where they would kind of take turns at that position. So that's a really good move for them. And they didn't even have to give up any picks. Presumably, when they can, they'll sign him to a long-term extension. That's kind of what's been rumored. So I think it's going to be like, 4 years, 50-something million, something like that. So, again, a good deal for a good player. It's just obviously one thing to keep in mind with him is he is a guy that does tend to miss some time. He's been relatively durable the last couple of seasons because he played 71 last year, 67 the year before. But then before that, 41, 58, 64, So I mean, like he'll miss some time, and part of that's just because of the style of play. But I think he'll be a really valuable guy to have for them, and I think overall that's a really good get for Oklahoma City, especially because again, remember at the deadline it was suggested that Chicago had an opportunity to get him for multiple picks or whatever, and they didn't do it because I don't know. But regardless, I don't think they got a bad return in Josh Giddey. It just kind of depends on what they end up getting from him in a presumably contract year. So we'll see. But this is an Oklahoma City video. Then after that, they got Isaiah Hartenstein, right, on basically a 3-year, $90 million deal, basically. $30 million the first year, 28.5 the following year. Then the third year is non-guaranteed, right? It's basically a team option at 28.5 million. With that amount of money, it feels like he's probably going to be starting. I mean, obviously it's going to, if that happens, it's going to shake up what the team kind of looks like in terms of the starting group. It's just I would find it very difficult to believe that you'd give him all that money and then he's a backup. And also he just started for the Knicks last season. I could be wrong, but I feel like he's probably going to be moved into the starting five. And I think obviously when you look at Isaiah Hartenstein and what he did for the Knicks last season, again, he had an awesome season, basically his best season of his career, right? Even though like some of the numbers maybe you wouldn't think, but no, it was, trust me. 8 points a game, a little over 8 rebounds, 2.5 assists, just over a steal and just over a block, 64 from the field. Kind of funny how when he first came into the league, he was kind of trying to show that he could space the floor as a three-point shooter. Now he doesn't take threes at all. He's got, obviously that one-handed push floater that he's got in the free throw line and in, right? So he's got some really good skills there. He also can pass at the top of the key, in the high post areas like that. So he can kind of fit in with what they want to do with that 5-out, where he can operate with dribble handoffs. He can operate, with off-ball screens. So it's a really good addition, and it also kind of adds a bigger physical guy so that way when you match up against these bigger teams, you can have a guy that you can kind of just put on the other team's opposing bruising big for stretches, right? Like last year, they didn't really have anybody that you could say, all right, well, we're going to put you on Embiid for stretches. We're going to put you on Anthony Davis or Jokic, right? Basically just Chet Holmgren. And, he's a tall guy, but he's not really that big. So, obviously now you have another guy that to pair with him in the front court where you can have Isaiah Hartenstein take all the tough physical matchups. And then you can have Holmgren, I guess, kind of roam around and, patrol the paint to block shots and things like that. So I'm very curious to see how it works, but I think it is a good signing for Oklahoma City. And then in addition, they also, brought back and re-signed some of their other younger guys. Like they re-signed Aaron Wiggins, they re-signed Isaiah Joe. Nothing wrong with that, right? Those are guys that were rotational pieces for them last year, and you assume that they're going to continue to get minutes at certain points. And again, regardless, even if they don't, they could always be tradable contracts. So nothing wrong with that, right? For Wiggins, basically 10 million this year. Then after that, it goes down to 9 to 8, then to 7. And then for Isaiah Joe, same thing, starts at 12 and then goes down to basically 11 in 2028 with a team option. So they're all longer term deals, but not a ridiculous amount of money at all. Then they also drafted a couple of guys. They drafted Nikola Topic
Oh
in the first
God,
round. Your
don't get me
guy.
started.
Yeah,
Not
your
my
guy.
guy.
Yeah, but they drafted Nikola Topic in what was kind of, I think, a little bit of a surprise initially because of the fact that it felt like, and this was before we knew about what they were going to do in free agency and whatnot, because we didn't know at that point, other than I think the Caruso deal, if I'm not mistaken, unless that was later. I'd have to go back and look. But either way, we thought they might take it big, but they ended up taking Nikola Topic. But it's a weird pick, but, for them, he's a guy, obviously, that since he had that ACL injury, he's going to be a redshirt guy, so he's not going to play at all. So he'll probably just be able to rehab and, I guess do whatever he would do in the offseason in terms of developing and whatnot. Because it's like at this point, if you're Oklahoma City, you don't necessarily have to add a bunch of young talent at this point because you already have a lot of young talent. So for them, it's basically kind of just taking a chance on a guy that a lot of people did like initially early on when people were scouting all these guys. Then obviously some stuff came out about his physicals where they were a lot different than what a lot of people initially thought. And then I think that kind of made people a little bit lower on him because of the fact that initially it was thought that he had long arms. He doesn't. He is a negative wingspan.
Yep.
And then also obviously the injuries happened as well, right? He had 2 major injuries, if I'm not mistaken. And he's only 19. So there's some concerns there. Also, not necessarily the best outside shooter, but he can handle the ball. He can pass. We'll see where his, jump shooting comes along. We'll see where his defense comes along. But we won't see him at all this year because he's rehabbing from an ACL injury that I think he suffered playing overseas. So we'll see. It's a weird pick, but if he comes back from his injury in year 2 or 3 or whatever, and then he ends up being like a decent backup guard off the bench, that's not really a bad thing. It's just bizarre because it doesn't seem like it would necessarily fit a ton with what they have. But I guess it just kind of depends on perspective in terms of what you feel like Oklahoma City could probably use. Maybe you feel like they might need another ball handler to come off the bench and just kind of, run some of the possessions when SGA is not on the floor. You do have Jalen Williams who can kind of do some of that, but it never hurts to have another guy like that. But what do you think of the pick? Because it was definitely kind of a polarizing one. But it's also like, I guess, in theory, if you're Oklahoma City, you shouldn't really have to rely on the 12th pick being good. But it also was just not who I would have expected them to pick. But, to be fair, the draft was kind of shook up after the first 5 picks because the first 5 picks went basically how everybody thought. And then after that, everything kind of went off the rails.
Yeah, I mean, with that pick, like you said, it's an odd one considering who they do have off the bench. Like Kassan Wallace, he's still there and he can, definitely run an offense. We saw, little spurts of that throughout the season. So, maybe it's just like, a depth thing, insurance. Because I do understand why people are high on the kid. Like he
Right.
has a ton of potential in terms of, what we've seen on the film in terms of the playmaking and the passing and just his ability to create for other people. It's just you already have Shea and you already have Kassan
Right.
Wallace, J Dub, Chet can even do that as well. So it might be a little bit of redundancy, and that's kind of why I wasn't too high on the pick. But at the same time, I
Right.
do understand because it could be like a hidden gem kind of thing where it's like that's the steal and that's like the best player in the draft. But who knows? And it's also he could like be traded down the line because I think people will always fall in love with his potential.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at too, where I feel like he might be good. I just feel like he may be on the wrong team.
Yeah,
But
exactly. Yeah.
I guess at the same time, there's not really a lot of pressure right now because he's not. We everybody knows he's not going to play.
Yeah.
And even if he was healthy, he probably still wouldn't really get a lot of minutes because they already have a bunch of other guys that they've kind of already managed to work into the rotation. I know it would feel kind of weird for a lottery pick to not play much, and I'm not saying he wouldn't. It's just where would he fit in terms of, because you don't really want to take. I mean, I guess maybe you could take away minutes from some of the lesser ish guys in the rotation, but he is a point guard. So, and that's not really the position where it's like, yeah, we need more of that. I mean, I guess you could look at it from maybe a backup point guard, although that's kind of Kason Wallace, but, maybe you might feel like maybe they might need a scoring point guard off the bench or something like that. But I don't know. I mean, that could be what he grows into, but he needs to be able to show that he can shoot, I think,
Yeah,
first and
and be
foremost.
healthy.
Yeah, and be healthy too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, yeah, so I'm kind of with you where I know there are a lot of people that like it. I just feel like it might not be the right team. But
Yeah.
to be fair, he hasn't played 1 minute yet. So
Yeah.
he could
You're right.
come back a year from now. And then we're going into next season, and then you hear all the training camp stuff about like, yeah, this guy's ready to roll, or
Right.
whatever. But we won't know. We
Yeah,
won't know
it's
until
it's
next.
going to be intriguing. I feel like it is like a
Yeah.
mystery, the biggest mystery of
Yeah.
this rookie class so far.
Then they also drafted Dylan Jones, right? Kind of like a undersized but very physical forward, right? He is 22, soon to be 23 at the end of this month, out of Weber State. So, I don't know how many minutes he'll actually get because, OKC at times will play a ton of guys at different points over the course of the season. But I feel like now that they've kind of reached the point where they're trying to be a really, really good team, I don't know if that guy's going to play a whole lot because, I mean, age-wise, he's not a 19-year-old rookie. So maybe if somebody's hurt, he could just slide in and they might be okay. But at the same time, it wouldn't shock me if he just spends time, if both guys spend time playing more in the G League because I just kind of wonder where the minutes would come from unless you're going to take away minutes from maybe some of the other like second, third string forwards that OKC tends to put out there, like maybe a Kenrich Williams or, an Usman Jang or something like that. But I don't know. I mean, I just would be curious to see where the minutes would come from.
Yeah, I agree. That's I mean, it's a good pick. I think it fits the mold, fits the
Yeah,
timeline. But yeah, it definitely comes down to the minute spread because I don't think they're in Indiana territory in terms of how many people that they play, but we're getting there. And during the regular season, that might benefit them, but in the playoffs, they need to really narrow it down. So I don't really see him being a huge factor.
right. Yeah, and just always just as a reminder, like a lot of times you don't normally expect rookies to do a ton in the postseason
No.
just because it's a very I mean obviously you have the college tournament, but the NBA playoffs is another level where it's just a lot of guys may not necessarily be ready for it. I mean we've seen veterans right that have been in the league for quite some time, look like they're not necessarily
They
able
still
to.
can't put it together. Like there's tons of guys that are playoff fallers, and
Right,
they're
exactly.
20 or not 20, but 12-year veterans and stuff like that. So
Yeah, exactly. So, we'll see, but I'm not expecting those guys. Well, I already know Topic won't play, but I'm not expecting those rookies to play
no,
minutes. That's going to
no,
be more of the guys that have already been consistently playing. And that's the nice thing about, obviously Oklahoma City, they made some moves, but they still have a lot of other guys on the roster that are still here from last season. So
yeah,
the main thing that I think will, I guess, be a shakeup is that starting five will presumably change. I guess the question is, what is the starting five? Because if you're going to add Isaiah Hartenstein into the starting five, I mean, it's not a guarantee. I'm just kind of assuming because of his contract that that's what's going to happen. Unless they just like, we'll have 48 minutes of center play. I don't know. But you could have, I guess, him and Chet together. Does that mean now you move Jalen Williams over to the three and then SGA? But then who's the fifth guy? Is it Caruso? Is it Lou Dort?
mm.
Or do they just go back to Holmgren at the five and have Hartenstein as the backup five? I don't know. I mean, what do you kind of think of that? Like, because obviously, like what they close with may not be what they start with, anyways. But just in terms of their main five guys, what are you thinking?
Yeah. I think it's gonna vary based on the matchup, but
Okay,
um,
yeah, I think that's the point too.
generally, I would say obviously Shea.
Yeah,
Um, I'd probably go Lou Dort if you want me to be real. I
okay,
think they should try and double down on that physicality aspect. Because
hmm,
they're already so good on defense, but it was more so like the physicality, more so than peskiness. So, I would go with Dort at the two, J Dub at the three, Chet at the four, and Hartenstein at the five, and have
hmm,
Caruso come off the bench, Kassan Wallace off the bench, and the other rotational guys. It's going to be a very interesting and powerful, if not the
yeah,
best, start group in the West. If you want me to be real,
mhm.
that spoiler for what I have to say, but I think they're going to be the best team in the Western Conference.
Yeah, and I do agree with you on that, and obviously we'll talk about that more when we go through the over under stuff. But
Yeah,
yeah, I actually like kind of what you mentioned about the physicality aspect, where because there are questions because somebody might make the case of, well, they just traded for Caruso and presumably they're going to give him an extension. So why wouldn't they just start him? But they don't have to. Like you said, they could just start Lou Dort because he's been the starter there for a while and he can still shoot threes at a pretty solid clip. And like you said, even though he's not quite as tall as Caruso, he's still a big, physical, strong guy. And that's valuable to have in a starting five like that, where, like you said,
mm,
now you go from kind of a thin, kind of wispy group to now you have a lot more of a stronger, like you said, muscle group. Like you have
yes,
some guys in there that can, kind of bang with some of these other players,
yes,
even like you said, at the guard spot too. And that could be really helpful for this team where if they can kind of figure out how to deal with that physicality, then that could put them in a territory where, like you said, they could be the favorites in the Western Conference because there's a lot of directions where this team could go potentially. So either way, like they're in a really good spot. Like, just spoiler alert, I give them an A+ for their offseason. Um, because I think the fact that we talked about it at the end of last season, and we talked about it kind of throughout a good chunk of last season too, where we were saying like, what was OKC going to do at the deadline? Because we felt a little bit disappointed that they didn't really do anything at the deadline. I know they traded for Gordon Hayward, but which we thought was a great trade, which didn't really end up turning out that way, but it did give them the cap space, to be fair. So that honestly ended up being more than fine.
yeah,
So it's just the player ended up not really being as productive, and he ended up retiring. So either way, when you look at it from that perspective, we were wondering like, what were they going to do? Were they going to trade for a star? They didn't acquire a star, but they did get some real quality pieces that, like you said, kind of not only fit, but kind of also kind of, I guess, add on to what they were looking to do and also complement them in ways because these guys bring things to the table that they didn't necessarily have. Like Hartenstein brings in size, length, physicality, and rebounding, which they didn't have. They were one of the worst rebounding teams in the league last season. And then, you look at Caruso, like, yeah, they do have a lot of guards. But it's a much better fit than Josh Giddey, where Josh Giddey, you could argue might have more talent, although right now Caruso's probably just still the better player at this point, just from with what he does. But either way, now you're at the point where if you're OKC, you kind of already have your main core of SGA, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren. Those are your three. So now you have to figure out how to maximize and get the most out of those three. And Giddey just didn't seem like he was going to be able to do that. But with Caruso and Hartenstein, those guys should definitely be able to do that, and including some of the other guys that are still already here. So worst case scenario, some of these guys they'll be able to move on from, because ultimately you can't keep every single young player on this team because some of those guys have already been paid. But remember, they're core guys. Only one of them in SGA has been paid. Like Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams, those guys will be asking for extensions relatively soon because those guys are going into year 3. So next offseason is when they're going to presumably get extensions, and that's when this team's going to get super expensive. But it's good that they're putting in the work now and putting a team around these guys while they're still on relatively affordable deals, versus because SGA is already in max territory, but once Jalen Williams and Chet are in max territory, then it's going to be even more difficult, as we've already talked about with the new CBA. So, I think OKC basically did what they needed to do, where they got more size, they got more physicality, and still were able to add shooting, and they were able to add veterans. Because you're talking about, again, Caruso was on a championship team, and then Hartenstein wasn't, but he was a big part of a team that was looking to be, a serious contending team. It didn't turn out that way, mainly because of all the injuries, but he clearly is a guy that can help impact winning, as is Caruso.
Yeah, 100%. I think we both talked about some pretty good stuff about Oklahoma City. But the one thing that I do kind of want to harp on, and I think is going to be the main reason outside of the fact that they did all this amazing stuff in the offseason, is the fact that last year, the majority of the guys that got playing, like serious playing time, were under 25 years old, and they got the number 1 seed. So regardless of what kind of offseason they really had, they were probably going to be the number 1 seed again. Obviously with trajectory and how development works in the NBA, most guys are going to progressively get better. So the development alone from all these guys is just going to take them a super long way. But as for their offseason, I would say A+ automatic all around. All great stuff. Hartenstein fills the void of the rebounding stuff. So, that's a simple no-brainer move. And I know some people were like, overpay. Well, you kind of have to, because that's how valuable that is. And especially in the Western Conference, you need that. And we saw last year they literally got punked, and it was not looking good. So adding a guy like Hartenstein and bringing his physicality in alongside Lou Dort gives you physicality at 2 parts of the basketball floor that they were kind of getting punked around. So what's up? What were you gonna say?
No, I was agreeing. Agreeing.
And the cool thing I think about this team is they're very versatile, but they also have so much redundancy, but it's not bad redundancy, if you can kind of catch what I'm saying. So like you have some really lengthy defenders in, I would even say Shea, Caruso. You only really need one of those guys on the floor at a time, depending on the night. And that's why you have a Lou Dort to be out there, to be the physical guy, to, mess with the Zions, the Lukas and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. Ingram's, that was hilarious. I mean, he completely negated him. So yeah, I think, this team has what it takes to be the number 1 seed again. Bringing in Caruso is awesome. And even like the Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins contracts, I think those are great value. Like,
right.
I didn't expect those contracts to look as good as they do now. So that's pretty cool.
Because those could be real rotational guys. They already were last year, but they could continue to be, and they're very inexpensive.
Yeah, and like adding the 2 guys, in Caruso and Hartenstein, it doesn't break up the scheme. It doesn't take any touches away from anybody. It only adds to the system that they run, and it's going to be amazing. And we're all expecting leaps from J-Dub, definitely Chet as well. And I think putting Chet at the 4 is going to be very interesting, because I think it's going to open up his bag offensively and defensively. So I think we're going to see not necessarily, like a different version of him, but I think an improved version where he doesn't have to really worry about being the last line of defense. He can be a great help defender while also doing a bunch of stuff on offense and taking care of mismatches. And We already know that their zone is pretty good. So, needless to say, I think OKC is going to be the number 1 seed pretty much just because of their amazing offseason they had. And it wouldn't surprise me if they win 60 games. Spoiler alert for the over-under, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they go over 60.
Yeah, I mean, because again, you look at this roster, and we talked about it, where you got guys that complement them, and they also kind of, you know, help kind of maybe not solve, but definitely mitigate some of the issues that they were having anyways. Because like you said, that Dallas series, a lot of it came down to not just obviously, what some of the Dallas guys were able to do, but remember, like Dallas was getting a ton of offensive rebounds. They were getting, extra opportunities. They were getting lobs. And then OKC, right, all the 3-pointers that went in during the regular season, they all missed while you were watching Derek Jones Jr. and PJ Washington hit every single three
Yeah.
in a lot of the big games. So now you have some guys where, like a Hartenstein doesn't have to rely on a 3-pointer in order to be effective because, he's there to primarily get you rebounds. He's there to kind of run some of your offense. And then even a Caruso who can shoot, right? Well, he's also an elite defender. So even if he's not shooting the 3 that well, he still can make a positive impact. And like you said, he's not going to take away from any of the core guys. Like you're not going to have possessions where SGA doesn't get a touch because Isaiah Hartenstein or Caruso, have to have the ball in their
Yeah.
hands and
Yeah. Heck no.
do random things. And that's not a knock on Josh Giddey. It's just a sign that it's a much better fit, and it's a sign that this team now is trending upwards and continuing to go upwards. So now you have to think about, all right, how do we optimize this roster around our 3 guys? Because essentially, you're banking on SGA, who's already, your superstar guy, number 1 guy. And then after that, you're hoping that Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams can continue to develop because, that's where if those guys can become legitimate second and third options on a really good team, then that's where, you're going to have the ability to win it all. So
Yes.
that's exactly. And now, when we look at the NBA over-unders, again, we've continued to talk about this several times, right? Where again, we're not trying to provide advice. It just kind of gives us something to look at. But the over-unders basically for the Thunder are 56.5. So they won 57 games last season. So the question is, do they win more games than what they were able to do last season? Because I would go over as well.
Over. I think they win
And I
60
think,
plus, bro.
yeah, and I think for the most part, in terms of the 1 seed, I think there's going to be a pretty decent discrepancy between them and the next team. And it's not that any of the other teams are bad. It's just like you said, OKC has, because of the type of players it's got and the amount of talent that they have on both ends of the floor, they're going to be like a regular season winning machine,
Yeah.
basically, right?
Yeah.
Like, say, like Boston last season won 64 games and basically torched everybody and ran away with it in the Eastern Conference and the NBA at large, come postseason. But
And
with
considering one more thing, because like with OKC in the West, like think about it. A couple of the teams that we've already talked about definitely got worse.
right,
And there's some other teams that we haven't talked about that you could say they got a little bit worse, a little bit better. But does it translate to regular season wins in that conference?
right,
No.
yeah,
I think the only team that's done anything in the Western Conference by that kind of standard would be Oklahoma City. They're the only ones that I really think are going super over.
yeah. And I think, and again, and like you said, even though some of these other teams may be a little bit better or a little bit worse, well, the thing is, OKC, some of the teams that maybe we'll see, some of the teams that maybe in the regular season they struggled with a little bit more, they might be able to have a better time. Like they may have who knows, but they might have a better chance when they play, say, like the Los Angeles Lakers, right? Because now, not that Isaiah Hardenstein's going to shut down LeBron and AD. It's just it's a guy that you can actually put out there that can actually get you some extra opportunities, for rebounds and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I mean, like whereas instead of like say like the other Jalen Williams, right, trying to box out Anthony Davis, or honestly either Jalen Williams trying to box out Anthony Davis and like Lou Dort guarding LeBron, like that's just not going to work. But now you have a little bit more size and length, in addition to some of these other teams that we've talked about. Because I think the Kings were a team that torched Oklahoma City last year multiple times. And, hey, the Kings made some changes as well to their roster, which we'll get into at some point. But yeah, I think I agree with you. Where I feel like that's the only team in the West where I think like it's a surefire over, especially because they've had a pretty good track record in terms of health. So hopefully they stay healthy again. But we haven't really had issues with them in terms like Chet Holmgren obviously missed his entire rookie season, but then last season he played every single game. So is there an in between maybe that we might get from him? I'm not sure.
I
But to be
I
fair,
feel like his was his summer league or pro am related.
it was the program thing I mentioned. Like
Yeah,
that was just a freak
yeah.
injury. But
I
either
I,
way,
I think
but
he'll be all right.
But either way, like now you have Hartenstein. So like at least you have another big where like let's say if somebody were to miss some time, you're not completely stuck in the mud because you
Yeah,
don't have another legitimate viable
yeah.
option at the 5. And then in addition, you just got guys that are always going to play hard and run up and down the floor, right? You're not going to have those random games necessarily where everybody's kind of like, I'm a little bit gassed. It's been like what 5 games and 7 nights. Because these guys got young legs, so
Yeah.
that's where I think they're going to have a leg up with a lot of the teams in the Western Conference. But I think the big question is, we did say that they're going to be over, but I think the real question, which is the really tough one to solve, is do we actually expect them to represent the Western Conference to reach the NBA Finals? Because that's the question where I'm kind of grappling with it, and I don't even know. Because honestly, like I still don't really have like a solid team that I've kind of chosen to come out of the Western Conference because we've already talked about it where, you're kind of focusing in on 4 teams at the, in the West right now where you feel like they have a decent shot of coming out of the West. Maybe somebody else shocks us, but all of them have pros and cons. And to be fair, I mean, like every team has pros and cons at this point. But in the West, it's funny because Denver was kind of the easy favorite a year ago, and then they didn't make it. And then in both off seasons, they've not really improved necessarily, but they do have the winning pedigree of having a title with, a proven core, and they do have the best player. Then you look at Dallas, they just made the finals. They made some changes to their roster. And I would say they improved, but are they going to be able to do it again? Is Kyrie going to be able to stay healthy? Right. And then obviously you have, the Minnesota Timberwolves, right, who were in the Western Conference Finals, but their roster's a little bit different. So we'll see if they get back
Very
there.
actually.
And then you have Oklahoma City, right, where they I think are considered by a lot of people, including us, to be definitely have the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. It's just you know do I expect them to get out of the West? Because I definitely think that now they have a real legitimate chance. Like we thought that they would actually beat Dallas last year, but I don't think we expected them to make the NBA Finals because we thought it was going to be Denver before they decided to crash and burn against Minnesota. But I guess what do you think about this? Right? Like, I mean, like, are you ready to say OKC's should be the favorite in the West, not just in the regular season, but also for the postseason, or is it just kind of more so? Maybe we might need to wait and see because I think kind of you already kind of hinted at it's still a super young team that doesn't have a lot of experience, and that's where if you run into a team with more experience, maybe a Denver, right, where maybe Denver isn't quite as good as they were a couple of seasons ago, but they have all the experience where maybe they could best you in a 7-game series, even if they're on the road. But or even like a Dallas or something like that. But what do you think?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
Right.
Because on paper and from a talent perspective, and how loaded they are, you can only really say, yeah, they're coming out of the
Mhm.
West. But then I look at it from, they haven't really proved anything yet. I'm
Mhm.
not saying that they won't, but if we're looking at them right now, it's tough to pick them to come out of the West. Easy to pick them
Mhm.
to be the number 1 seed, but representing the Western Conference in the NBA Finals is very different than being the number 1 seed. We all know that.
Right.
It's hard for me to not pick Denver, even though we haven't talked about them yet. We will be,
Mhm.
but it's hard for me to not pick them because of the reason that you stated. You have Jokic, you made some additions, you lost some things, but you also have Jamal Murray. Does that duo turn up in the postseason like we saw when during their finals run? I don't know. I can't. I'm not picking Minnesota. I think that ship has sailed.
Mhm.
Dallas is a very, very good pick because they've been there before. They've proved that they can do
Right.
it. Can they do it again would be the question. There's so many unknowns. It's like I would say Dallas is similar to Denver in that boat where I feel more sure of those two coming out of the West and representing them in the NBA Finals. But
Right.
Oklahoma City's talent, they're just the better team, I think,
Mhm.
in terms of talent perspective. So I know that was kind of like a bunch of dodging and dancing, but I'll say they do it.
Right.
I think they do it. This is the year. You've already got Shea, who's an MVP
Hmm.
candidate, and I
Yeah.
think with the jumps and leaps that I'm expecting the rest of the
Hmm.
core to make, specifically J Dub and Chet,
Hmm.
um, I think this is their year to go to the NBA Finals. Maybe not to win it, but just to make an
Right.
appearance.
Yeah, and that's the thing where I think we do have to differentiate where winning it is a lot different from just making the finals. Because even Dallas, they made the NBA Finals, but they didn't necessarily
Sure.
win it. And I think, let's say if Boston comes out of the East, I think there's a lot of teams where it might be a little bit tough for them to beat Boston because Boston is super talented as well. I think OKC does have some matchup areas where they can, because they can play 5 out too, and they have a lot of lengthy athletic guys. So they could probably match up against Boston better than maybe some other teams. But yeah, it's tough to say. I think like you said, it really kind of hinges, and as we've already talked about, on Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren. Because I think if those two guys become, real legitimate second and third options, right? 2, I think, for Williams and 3 for Holmgren. If those guys actually become those type of guys in the playoffs, then yeah, they can do it. It's just the question is, are they actually going to be able to do it? I mean, but when we look at that OKC core, you got what was it, Durant in 2007, Westbrook in 08, and then Harden in 2009, and then when you go, so then 2009, 2010, 10, 11, 11, 12. So then after what, like 3, 4 seasons together, then they made the playoffs. So timelines wise, this could be
Matches
it.
up.
I mean,
I
obviously,
think it's
like,
their year.
yeah, like obviously for Chet, it's year 2, but for Williams, it's year 3. And then for SGA, I mean, it's been what, like 5 seasons at this point with Oklahoma City,
Mm-hmm.
6.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the bubble year was his first year there. So,
Yeah.
uh, I mean, yeah, I think they can do it. And, I don't know. Like I'm still kind of trying to not necessarily quit and give up on, say, like the Nuggets, or even like a Dallas. But I think with OKC, it's such a volatile floor and ceiling where it's like their ceiling is probably better than any of these other teams, but the floor is not even, and the floor isn't even low. It's just like, if those guys don't pan out, then they probably can't make it out of the West. Like, and
Well,
not that they
their
don't
their
pan out, but
floor
like,
their floor is that of a promising young team.
yes,
That's the
exactly.
problem.
Like last year. Yeah. Like last season, which is fine. It's just the thing is that the ceiling, like I said, is really scary. So, I
Yeah.
mean, but if we like those guys and we're gonna bet on those guys, then I say we go for it and
That's
say,
my point.
say right now that Oklahoma City is
Yeah.
gonna represent the Western Conference. So, because I do
Agreed.
believe in those guys, I already believe in SGA, and
Yeah.
I do like Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren. So,
Yeah.
let's do it. And
Yeah.
if we go down in flames, well, we were still confident about it.
And
So,
I'm telling you, I think the only reason that doesn't happen is only
mhm,
if those other two guys do not progress like we think they are.
right.
If they
Yeah,
make, a little bunny hop, not enough. They won't
right.
be representing the Western Conference. But if they turn
Yeah,
into what we think they will turn into, or at
mhm,
least show shades of it, massive shades
yeah.
of it, all right,
Mhm.
we got ourselves a ball game.
Somewhere around All Star plus, like, and I'm not saying they have to make the All Star team because
All
like
star
Jamal Murray
snubs.
hasn't made any. Yeah, like Jamal Murray hasn't made the All Star team, but we know, he's like a borderline All Star, and then in the playoffs he's like borderline All NBA or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, if those guys progress like how we've seen them, or at least well, Chet was a rookie, but Jalen Williams has gotten better each year. So if he continues to get better, then I think that's your number 2 guy, and if he can actually become like I said, borderline all-star or better,
Yeah.
then I think that will be enough along, like you said, with Chet.
Because I feel like with J Dub, this might be a very hot take, and it goes for chat too. But
Mhm.
J Dub, I feel like can do things that only J Dub can do. I don't know
Right,
if
he's
I'm
got
tripping.
super long arms.
Yeah,
He's got super long arms. He's got, some really good physical tools too because he's a very good athlete, but he's also really strong and physical.
he's
So,
got a
I mean, that's
brain
kind of
too. He's got a
yeah,
brain.
exactly. Exactly. So that's kind of a really good combination. And he already showed that at least in the regular season, his 3-point shot, he shot over 40%. The question is, can that keep up in the playoffs? But he's also got some really good, even though he's got the athleticism and the physical gifts, like you said, he's also got a really high IQ approach to his game where he's also kind of developed some of these kind of, quick and, kind of nice, smooth tricks of the trade in order to kind of figure out ways to score in all these crazy angles, and I think
Yeah,
that's kind of an impressive part about it. And he can play defense as well. So that's the cool thing, that like all of your core guys are not just really good players on the offensive end, but they're all also pretty good defensive players. And then you surround all three of those guys with other good defensive players too. Yeah, that's where I
scary.
think the ceiling is the championship caliber team. It's just a matter of could they beat the Boston Celtics in a 7-game series?
I would
If
even go. I would go as far to say their ceiling is really a dynasty. That might be looking way too far ahead, but I don't know. I could see that team, if they turn into what we think they'll turn into, they can win multiple chips.
Mhm. Because they're still young. It's
Yeah,
just a matter of as long if they can pay those guys and still keep some of the players they have,
yeah,
we'll see.
yeah.
But also Oklahoma City doesn't have a reputation of paying to keep guys because we saw what happened with
No,
James Harden. So
no. Yeah,
so so ideally, if they're gonna do it, it would probably be nice if they could do it within like the next 2 seasons or so.
yeah, yeah. It
But
needs to happen now.
yeah, so and that's the point where like now they're kind of at a point where it looks like they are poised and ready to try to, you know, compete with the big boys for an NBA title. And I think they can do it. And we already said we're gonna put our foot down and we're gonna say that they're gonna represent the Western Conference, which I guess, kind of I guess and maybe we'll talk more about, more predictions, once we get done with this off-season stuff. But because we'll see what the Celtics do if they can stay healthy. That might be the possible finals matchup preview. We'll see.
Maybe, maybe, maybe.
So after that, I mean, when we look at Oklahoma City, I mean, again, what else can you really say? They got a great young nucleus. They have a decent collection of role players around them that should
Hmm.
presumably improve. Because even a guy like a Kason Wallace, we hadn't even talked about really, right? That was kind of a surprise rookie last year, where we already knew it was a good pick, but then to see him come in and already play and translate on both ends of the floor really well was pretty cool to see. Right, where he's already kind of playing pesky defense, really athletic, gets up and down the floor, and he can shoot. But I guess outside of those three main guys, what other young guy are you looking at, hoping to kind of see a little bit more from? If unless if you want, you can say Case and Wallace as well, unless there's someone else you're thinking of.
I mean, I know they drafted AJ Mitchell, if I'm not mistaken. That could be an intriguing piece. Probably won't
Hmm.
play a lot though. Just considering the guard room on this team is
Yeah, I think he's
super
on a two-way.
saturated. Yeah, so there you go. Probably Kasan Wallace, honestly. I mean, there's because if he can not necessarily be a star, but if he
Hmm.
can be better than he was last year,
Yeah,
yeah, that'll help their ceiling as well and their floor. So,
yeah, maybe
especially
add
with Topic not playing. So,
right. Yeah, maybe if he can add a little more offense, maybe like some playmaking, maybe a little bit
sure.
more scoring possibly. But because like they don't really have another go-to offensive guy off the bench. But at the same time, then it's like you don't want to necessarily do some of that at the cost of the defense. And that might just be a thing that they're missing. It's just a matter of they do have, some really good offensive options at the top. So and I guess, what else do you think that this team might possibly be missing, in addition to what I kind of already mentioned, maybe another additional backup big. I mean, you do have Jalen Williams, so that could be kind of the guy. Now, instead of it being your normal backup center when you're already small, then it can kind of be if you want a smaller lineup, you can go with him as opposed to him really being the only other center you have.
Yeah, I would say maybe really even a taller backup
Yeah, four
wing.
or five.
I
Yeah,
was
four or
thinking of
five.
a taller like power forward. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that would be intriguing. And honestly, I thought what they were going to do last year, they were going to
Mm-hmm.
acquire Clint Capella and nip this whole backup center or other center thing in the bud, and then go out and acquire somebody else who was more of a wing. But this works just as well, if not better. Um,
Yeah.
but I would definitely say maybe just like a taller defensive minded wing that could play the small ball five. I don't know, but that's kind of unrealistic considering, who's out there in the market. But the cool thing is they have assets, so who knows? We might see another something get cooked up.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see, but because they do have some pieces to still make some other trades that we're not expecting, like they could kind of compile some of those guys and kind of add them into a trade like by February or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they still have some other young guys that don't even really play, like Usman Jiang. Like he doesn't really even play.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I don't even really know what to make of him. I know he's kind of a 3-and-D wing, but he's not really a 3-and-D wing because he doesn't really do anything for the most part. So I mean, and I'm not trying to
Yeah.
sound like trying to sound harsh, but that's a pick that doesn't necessarily seem like so far that it's necessarily panned out. He's played sometimes, but you would think just given his length and possible two-way versatility that he could be out there more, but I just don't think he's really shown enough
I don't think
yet.
he's
And
ready.
he's still young. I mean, he's
Not ready yet.
21, but that could be but he's only got 2 years left. So that's why I'm saying like that could be a guy that could easily be thrown into a trade. Like you could easily package like 2, 3 guys that again, even a guy like a Kenrich Williams, because eventually you're going to get to a point where they remember last season they had to start cutting guys from the roster because they couldn't keep them,
Yeah.
right? So that's where you kind of wonder what's going to happen, but that's kind of the cost of now you're putting together real contenders. Some of the guys that were rotational guys for a decent team are maybe guys that you don't want playing as much for like a real contender, a real
Mm-hmm.
championship.
Yep.
So we'll see. But that's the nice thing too is they also have flexibility. So let's say the first half of the season they see what they got, then they'll see what they need, and then they can kind of move from there.
Yeah.
And that was also part of the nice thing about the offseason is that the things that they didn't get in the way of their possible future plans. It kind of also adds to it. So that's the best part about it.
Mm-hmm. Amazing
So
offseason.
yeah. So let us know in the comments your thoughts on what OKC did in terms of what they did with this offseason. I mean, did you like the guys they signed? Did you like the guys they traded for? The guys they drafted? Let us know. But after that, we do have a couple of NBA news things to get to. So PJ Tucker is going to be away from the Clippers team. So the Clippers are going to try to find some type of solution. I mean, I don't know why they didn't just do that, a year ago, but they didn't. And now they're going to, I guess, try to do it again. I don't really know how much he can really contribute at this point. Maybe something, but if you're going to get him, it's better that he maybe gets bought out and then it's a minimum as opposed to paying whatever. But I don't really know what to expect from him because, they kind of dusted him off at the end of the postseason last year, right, against the Mavs, where they had him, I think, start because he gave them like okay minutes the game before and then didn't really do much. I mean, but also that Clippers team was kind of a mess. But I don't know because I don't think anybody's going to realistically trade for him at this point just because it's not like he makes a minimum contract. I mean, it's not like he makes a ton of money. It's just like if I'm another team, I don't really want to pay in order to bring him in. I'd rather just hope that he gets bought out and then sign him. I mean, if we look at his contract, he makes 11 million. So he's I'd have to check, but he's either really close to or past kind of the mid-level money where where certain teams can't sign them if he's if they're over the first or second apron or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd have to check because I'm not sure. He might just barely miss it.
Right. I mean,
But
it, to me, I think he's cooked. Not to hate, but
mhm.
his game was kind of predicated on, yeah, I'm a small ball five pretty much, and as long as I can hit shots in the corner, we're good. And he can't really do either of those things anymore at this point. And that's just age. So it doesn't surprise me that they both want to part ways with each other.
Right. And it's also like he doesn't need to be on this team
No.
because like he's 39, so he's at a point where either he should be on some contending team not playing a whole lot but maybe playing some role or just retire. I mean, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if he wants to be on a young team. I don't know, but like this isn't either. The Clippers aren't right now a contender, nor are they a young up and coming roster. So
Right.
there's no point for him being on a roster like this. And also he didn't really play much last year, so that's probably part of it. But Also, again, how much of that is, like you said, he's just not quite as good as he was before. So that's kind of the issue. And maybe the Clippers just weren't the team for that, but I wouldn't expect much from him at this point. But if it's like a minimum contract and you just need a body, that's not really a problem. It's just I wouldn't pay $11 million for it, which is why I
Right.
don't think anybody will pay for him. So that to me is kind of the language of at some point he'll get bought out.
Right.
Yeah. And then after that, preseason has already started. So, I guess if you want, you can kind of obviously we've already talked about this. Take preseason with a grain of salt because if you don't, you will be fooled. It will
Mhm.
happen time and time again. And to be fair, sometimes preseason is a good indicator because sometimes we'll see teams have really good preseasons where they're taking everything seriously, they're playing guys pretty consistently, and then it pans out. But then there's other times where you're fooled because, like, say the Warriors the year they won the title had a really good preseason, and then it kind of showed, and then they won the title in 2022, right? You saw like Jordan Poole playing well, and you saw guys taking it seriously. But then say like the Warriors last season had a great preseason as well, and then they missed the playoffs.
Mhm.
So and I'm not just trying to pick on them,
Mhm.
because there are other teams that are in a similar basket. But just in terms of what we've seen so far from the preseason, it hasn't been a ton of games. Like you had Celtics, Nuggets; those guys played in the first half. Obviously Celtics without Porzingis, but Westbrook saw him on Denver. And you saw both positives and negatives, I guess, of him being on the team, which is what you expect, right? Like you see him running the second unit, and finding guys for good looks, but then sometimes also the fast break stuff and the defense stuff. I mean, again, like it's not like it's what you would expect. It's just the question of, and we'll get into it when we talk about the Nuggets. It's just it's mainly contingent on Jamal Murray and I think some of the other young guys. But what did you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I've kind of enjoyed looking at preseason. The main thing I've really been looking at are
Yeah.
the rookies. Um,
Yep.
so like, kind of just go around the league, I guess.
Hmm.
Like Minnesota, I would say their rookies look pretty
Yep.
solid. Granted, I don't
I
think
agree.
Rob Dillingham is putting up 20 shots a night, but
No.
what he was able to do on and off the ball was pretty dope.
Yes.
Um, Lakers connect.
Hmm.
He
Yeah.
looks pretty poised. Looks like AR 2.0, maybe better,
Yeah.
taller.
But even more athletic. So
Exactly, taller, better, stronger, faster, whatever the case
I
may be.
think he is a better spot up off the catch guy than Reeves. Because like Reeves, I think is better off the dribble. I think Connect will be better off the catch, off of handoffs.
Yeah, and then, kind of going around Celtics, they look the part once again.
Mhm.
Granted, not a whole lot of minutes from the starters,
Right.
but at least that you have some sort of talent
Yes.
from the bench a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's kind of all I've really looked at so far. I know we
Hmm.
have a couple of games going on as we're
Yeah.
recording this stuff, but yeah, Celtics look the part. The rookies that have played have looked very intriguing and
Hmm.
look NBA ready, which I think was kind of something that people were um, predicting. Like this is an NBA ready draft
Right.
class, but you're probably not going to have a whole lot of superstars.
Yeah, and even some of the other teams, like say Detroit,
Mm-hmm.
Ron Holland, right,
Mm-hmm.
came off the bench in his debut for Detroit, and he kind of flashed some of the all-around aspects, right, of his game. And like you said, it's a good point where a lot of these rookies are supposed to be a little bit more NBA ready. And obviously we'll see more of them and talk about more of them as preseason goes on. And again, take it with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's just kind of interesting to see these teams, and it's a good sign because it shows that basketball is back, right? I mean, because like even say like Golden State and the Clippers, like it was kind of a weird game, obviously. In the second half, it was mainly the third string guys, but it was kind of just nice to see, some of these teams again, just because, especially because, with the Warriors, right, they're going to look pretty different because Clay's gone, in addition to some of the other vets. And then for the Clippers, there's no Paul George. So,
True.
and then you kind of look around, say like you said, some of the games going on right now, right? Like Lakers Suns.
Mm-hmm.
You had a couple other matchups like the Knicks played earlier today and the Hornets, and
Mm-hmm.
um,
Oh yeah,
some
Saloon
of the
looked good.
Hornets guys. Yes, I was gonna say Saloon looked good for the Hornets. And again, it's another team where the Charlotte is that same team that we keep talking about that we can't quit. Where like when they're healthy and guys are playing well, it looks like a fun team, but
Yeah.
then they always disappoint you because then you see Mark Williams on, not playing, or
Yeah. And LaMelo in a
hopefully it doesn't
cast or
happen.
something, it's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, and hopefully LaMelo Ball doesn't get hurt, but
Yeah.
same thing. And then, for the Knicks, right, their starters barely played. They played like 15 minutes, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
almost kind of like a troll from Tibbs, basically. But it is preseason. But the spacing for them looked pretty, significant. Where
Hmm.
again, as we talked about with Karl Anthony Towns as your five, right? He, his first couple of baskets, right? He's got a layup, he's got a deep three, and that's where if you're the Knicks, then that allows your other guys to be able to kind of get get inside the 3-point line and attack, which is what some of those guys like to do. Like, not that they can't
Ananobi,
shoot.
Bridges, Brunson, they all do it, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Even Josh Hart, same thing, right? Where
Yeah.
he's very comfortable driving and attacking, compared to spotting up and shooting.
Hmm.
So that's where, and again, we'll talk about it as it continues to go on. But just it's good to have basketball, or at least NBA basketball back, right? Because WNBA basketball is still going on. They're getting towards the end of their postseason, right? Because they
Yes, sir.
we already have one finals team there. But either way, the NBA season is coming up.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
so I mean, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts about Oklahoma City in the comments, your expectations. What do you thought? What do you thought about them in terms of what they did this offseason? And as we already said, the NBA season is starting up soon, man. I mean, it's crazy how
We're
fast this
back.
was. I mean, yeah, because initially the early part felt like it was kind of taking forever, but then the
Hmm.
fact that we had the Olympics and everything else in
Yeah.
between, I think kind of helped make the process kind of sped up a little bit, even
Yeah.
though we had stretches where we didn't have basketball, but it was more stretches where there was no basketball in the last couple of seasons. So that's where I'm excited. Of course, opening night is going to be a few weeks away. We've already talked about that. And as the NBA season kicks off, we're going to have plenty of content. We appreciate the new subscribers that have come in. Hopefully, we can continue to get more. So we appreciate all that. And we'll see you next episode.